Okay, so this week we're going to China. We're going to turn our attention to China and the wonderful canon of literature that exists there. Some very good thinkers, uh, interesting political philosophies as well. Now, as your book says, China developed independently of other societies, such as those in Mesopotamia and Egypt, but it developed in the Yellow River Basin for agricultural reasons, much as cultures such as Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the ones in India did, because they needed to be along rivers in order to use that water and the overflow, the flooding, for their own agriculture. In China, there is a long line of capable rulers who bring into existence important cultural inventions, but this type of rule eventually will give way to dynasties. The first being the Shang dynasty, ruled from 1750 to 1020 BCE. So this is, rulers handing down their empires to, and then well, not actually empires, but handing down their states to some relative. Uh, and this is what if you watch a show anything like I don't know Antique Roadshow, if somebody has some artifact, they usually say it's from this dynasty period. Now, China has a long history of divination, which is telling the future, and you would think that that's not important, but it's very important uh, as it interacts with society and with culture. So one of the earliest rulers your books mentions is Fu Zi, who developed the system of 8 trigrams. Now, a trigram is a combination of 3 lines, which are either solid or broken. So you either have a solid line or you have a line that's broken in half and there's a small space in between. And you use these trigrams in combination to get what's called the hexagram, and the hexagram then is number gives you a number from 1 to 63. You go to the I Ching, which is the book that the trigrams are used with, and to that particular number, and it will give you the advice that you should use. All right. And the I Ching is known as one of the 5 classics of Chinese literature. Now, writing develops and is used in conjunction with the rituals of divination, and this, along with the development of the Chinese language, is what helped to unify a Chinese nation and to help unify China politically. And all of this developed strongly under the Shang dynasty. Be aware that the writing is using 3 different instruments to say. You have pictographs, which is exactly what it sounds like. Sort of a picture that represents something. You have an ideogram, which is a character symbolizing an idea without giving you any idea of what the sound is like. And you have these radicals, which indicate a conceptual category. You just need to know those 3 words. Now, the Zhou or Chao people overthrow the Chang dynasty around 1150 to 1120 BCE. And what's really important here is that they use the excuse that it was heavenly intervention due to the Shang dynasty no longer being virtuous, and that the rulers had become tyrants. And so from here on out, you will have to use virtue as the basis for the legitimacy of your rule. And this is one of the reasons for the I Ching. The I Ching, if it's not used for divination, it can be used, as all 5 of the classics, as a guide for a virtuous life and for ruling virtuously. Now, the Shang improved both government and social institutions, mostly by basing the legitimacy of rule on the fact of holding to the laws and rules of previous good rulers. That's what allows them the virtuousness. And the Chinese, and in conjunction with this, the Chinese as a people and culture hold strong ties to the dead and to ancestors. So burial rites and rites honoring the dead survives, and which also gives you legitimacy, as do bronze working and decorative arts as far as cultural artifacts. Now, the Zhou considered themselves surrounded by barbarians, felt like they were somewhat paranoid about this. And in 7071 BCE, will actually be attacked, and that forces them to move west. And this results in history showing a Western Zhou and an Eastern Zhou period. Now, The Zhou or Chao dynasty collapses around 700 BCE and is finished around 256 BCE. You have an important period called the Warring States period between the 7 remaining states, where all 7 are fighting each other. And just prior to this, and living through part of it, and especially his students, is Confucius. Now, the Qin dynasty rules for a short period after the end of the Chao or the Zhou. And it gives us the first emperor, and also this is where the name China actually comes from, and China means Middle Kingdom. The Han dynasty removes the Qin dynasty, and during the Han we get Confucianism being implemented. Now it's 350 years later since Confucius came up with his ideas of how government should be structured, and is finally implemented. And what's most important is there's a philosophy implemented that promotion should be due to somebody's competency, that they're good at their job, not despotism because of who they know, right? And so China will use this for their politics, for their administration, and it will change China forever as it attempts to found this social order. Right? And we'll see it, we'll just barely touch on it. But when we go to Europe, we'll see that the despotism in Europe is one of the problems with the royal courts, is that there are people who hold positions just because their father has influence or because they're able to purchase their positions, instead of people holding a position because they're good at what they do. Now, at the time of Confucius, you also have another gentleman named Lao Tzu, who's a little bit more mythical. We're not quite sure if Lao Tzu actually existed. And we'll talk about that at another point. But he advocates something called Taoism. And Taoism is a philosophy of the way. All right, so that's what Taoism means, if you roughly translate it, is the. And here it states that there's a natural way to live one's life, living it in harmony with nature. And that social structures, the ones that Confucius is actually advocating, would only impede one from finding that way. And so these two philosophies are in direct opposition with one another. And in fact, the way we get the Tao Te Ching is supposedly because Lao Tzu was leaving it. He couldn't stand how societalized it had become, and he was going off into the wild. And a guard wouldn't let him pass the border without first writing down his thoughts. So he gave him this little book that he wrote within a day or two. All right. Well, covers China. As far as we're going this week, here is a map of unified China. I'm afraid it's a little blurry because it was small and I had to expand it. But this is what it looked like. All right, so I hope you enjoy the readings. It's a little bit easier this week than some of the others.